Good morning and good evening. I'm speaking to you from Ireland, and today I'm very privileged to have an opportunity to speak to the Osan International Forum. And the topic I want to speak to you today about is called Learning for Sustainable Futures, Green Farmers and Learning Neighbours. And in this project, I hope I can demonstrate to you some very, very interesting ideas that have emerged in this small Irish case study. So, this case study I would describe as an academic symbiosis. And what I mean by this is that this is something that emerged through a set of collaborations, and these collaborations led to more than the sum of the parts, as it were. So a PhD student of mine wished to do some research on influencing around pro-environmental behavior, asking the question, can we influence each other to be more environmentally conscious? And in this regard, she was very much aware of and impressed by a program among dairy farmers in a region which we call West Cork, and it's called the Carberry Greener Dairy Farmers Project. And she wanted to use that as a case study. And through the process, we decided we would ask the farmers, or at least a number of the farmers, to create digital stories. And the idea of the digital stories is that they would be short stories created by the farmers and their families. And these stories would be broadcast on a weekly basis to see if they would help to encourage other farmers to adopt greener policies. Through this process, we had a lot of engagement with the farmers. We developed the stories, but we also developed, or shall I say maybe expanded, one of our university programs to incorporate the farmers. So I just want to talk to you about the various aspects of this project and how it emerged. And I think it has certain value in terms of being a model that could be adopted. So we wanted to incentivize environmentalism. So this is a project for the university, but it's also a project for the Environmental Protection Agency, for the County Council. It was part of the project for the students. So all of us, I suppose, shared these goals. So through this project, we wanted to recognize good practice. We wanted the farmers themselves to acknowledge their own good practice, but we also wanted the farmers to share their best practice with their neighbors. So in this, we asked them to create digital stories, and each family was given an iPad, and they were given some workshops in terms of how to develop the digital stories, but they were given editorial freedom. They could put into these digital stories whatever they wished to put in. Then, as a consequence of this, we were asked if we could, given that the farmers gave so much of their time creating the stories and engaging with us, could we give something back from the university? So we decided that what we could potentially do is look at the farmers taking one of our programs. It's not a full degree, it's about 1/3 of a degree. It's called a diploma. At the time, it was called a diploma in environmental science and social policy. The publicity around the program obviously was very important because it raised good environmental practice among farmers in the local community, but also in the national community, because this information was also published in the National Farmers Journal and other outlets. Over time, and I'll talk a little bit about this, other dairy groups joined or wished to join. And of course, the critically important thing is that these good environmental practices influenced other farmers. Because if one farmer can see that his neighbor or her neighbor can do these things, then they will try to do them as well. So, as I said, it started with a doctoral researcher, my PhD student, and she wished to create a case study around her research. And basically what she wanted to do was to look at ways in which we could adopt best environmental practice, but also how we could influence each other to develop best environmental practice. Now in Ireland, dairy farming is a very, very, very big industry. And we are very proud of the fact that the production in many ways is extremely green. The cows live on grassland. There are not very, very many artificial inputs into it. But one of the things, of course, is that it has a huge environmental impact, and it is one of the big challenges for Ireland to tackle this. So the digital stories were to influence, were to help the farmers to reflect on what they were doing themselves, to identify their own best practices, for them to think about why they were doing it and why it was important to do it, but also to give little lessons, as it were, for their neighbours to watch. And the neighbours could watch these short videos on their smartphones, on their PCs, with their families, on their own, or whatever. And they would, in a sense, we would hope, become influenced and enthused about pro-environmental policies. Then we also had obviously cooperation from the Carbery dairy, which is an important dairy. And this was important as well in terms of our future developments. And it was also a way for acknowledging the farmers' own learning and best practice. So each of the farmers, we selected a number of farmers, and each one of them created their own digital stories. And each week the digital stories were broadcast, and you can see little pictures of them here. And I'm going to try and play a very short video which talks a little bit about it and gives you some sense of what the farmers were doing. But I would really strongly encourage you to go and look at these individual videos yourselves. These are some images from the actual digital stories.
In 2017, Carbery, in conjunction with Macroom E and with the Environmental Protection Agency, launched a digital storytelling project around environmental sustainability with farmers in West Cork. This was the first digital storytelling project of its kind with the agricultural sector in Ireland. The farmers from the 4 Carbery co-ops, Barry Rowe, Bandon, Drina and Lissavard, recorded their environmental sustainability experiences, entirely in their own words and without direction, with the objective that the videos they created would engage other farmers in pro-environmental behaviours. The farmers involved in the digital storytelling project are also members of Carbery Greener Dairy Farms programme. Carbery launched Greener Dairy Farms in 2012 as an innovative dairy efficiency programme designed to measure, monitor and optimise resource allocation and best practice on farm. One of the key highlights from the programme to date was a reduction in carbon footprint of 15% between 2012 and 2016. To find out more.
So in the little video, you will see a brief overview of the whole idea of the digital stories and the approach we took. It's interesting to note that the Carbery Greener Dairy Farms project has a huge impact in terms of the changing practice among the farmers who undertook this program. They indicate that there was a 15% reduction in their carbon footprint as a consequence. Now, in this project, the farmers were engaged in some practical as well as theoretical aspects of understanding what they were doing. So the farmers had a lot of different tasks to do. They had a lot of different thinking to do. They had to do a lot of reflection. They were engaged in a lot of seminars and so on. And it struck us that they already had done a lot of learning, which would align quite strongly with aspects of a program that we were running, which I mentioned earlier. So just to look at some of the things that the farmers were engaged in, they had to do soil testing, they had to do off-farm seminars. Some of them, you know, dealt with projects around water management, milk chilling, changing the plants in their grassland. Introducing more clover reduces the need for nitrogen, for instance. Slurry spreading. So this is, you know, choosing when to spread the slurry, how to spread it, and so on, reduces the leaching and damage to the environment. Extending the grazing season, so that the cows are out on the grass for a longer period of time, so they're indoors for less time. Changing the breeding patterns of their cows, so they change the breed of their cows. You will see in lots of the pictures, many of the cows are black and white, Holstein, Friesians. What you'll see in one of the pictures here, you'll see a slightly brown black cow, and this is a cross between a Jersey and a Friesian. And the idea here is that this is a smaller animal, has less environmental impact. So they also had to look at biodiversity. They looked at things like water heating, using solar panels, and a whole series of other projects. And some of this was quite complex and sophisticated. And we felt there was a lot of learning here, which needed to be captured in terms of what the farmers had done. So what we did was we had a conversation with the farmers group, with the dairy, and we decided from my department in the university, we are the department, we are called ACE, Adult Continuing Education. So we looked at the possibility of creating a project where we would look at the prior learning of these farmers and map them onto the learning outcomes of one of our programs, the Environmental Science and Social Studies. So initially, we did an initial mapping process, which was quite complex, a big project, to look at all of the learning outcomes of our program and all of the learning outcomes that the farmers had achieved through their organized program over a number of years. And we used a traffic light system, green, orange, and red. Green signifying that they had fully met the learning outcomes, orange, where they had partially met the learning outcomes, and red, where it was felt they had not achieved them at all, or these topics were not covered in their program. We then engaged in a weighting of learning outcomes in terms of their overall importance for the program. So this was also quite complex and important project, and this involved a lot of discussions with the academics involved to see how they would weight the learning outcomes. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create a cohort learning outcome portfolio. We didn't want each individual farmer to have to apply for a recognition of prior learning. We wanted to have their program recognized and then mapped onto our program, so that when a farmer applied to do our program, it would be already decided what level of recognition of prior learning they would get. So then we went involved in a validation of the learning evidence. So we had to go back to the university's own recognition of prior learning policy. We engaged with an external reviewer to review everything we were doing. We engaged with the internal academics in the university. It was eventually approved by the ACE Academic Standards Board and by the university's academic board, which meant that all of this was very, very solidly academically approved and very meticulously planned, and then was included in the statute, in the rules of the university. So just to tell you, we can look at this as a hugely important development for the farmers, and it was a hugely important development for the farmers, but it was also a hugely important development for our programs in our university, and it also had a lot of influence in terms of other universities in Ireland in terms of how to adopt a program like this. So we started with the Diploma in Environmental Science and Social Policy. This was the program we asked them to join. And in 2017, when we were looking at all of this, the diploma was struggling somewhat. It wasn't as vibrant as we would have liked it to be. Then we engaged in the cohort recognition of prior learning, access route for the greener dairy farmers. And through this process, 40 farmers from this little region have graduated from the university. They have now got their diplomas, which are an important recognition for them. For many of these farmers, it was their very first time attending university, or any of their families attending university. When we delivered the program, we delivered it at a time when the dairy cows were not milking, so the farmers had time to participate. Initially, we had planned to go to the areas where the farmers come from. They come from 4 different dairy co-ops in West Cork, rural communities, but the farmers decided they wanted to come to the university themselves. And then, as a consequence of these changes in the program in 2019, we decided to review the entire diploma to see what ways we could improve the diploma. So in a sense, this symbiosis is working, that the farmers are, in a sense, challenging us to improve our practices, and we are challenging them to improve their practices. So we changed the name of the diploma, and you can see the name of the diploma is now the Diploma in Environment, Sustainability and Climate. And you can see straight away that the climate and the Sustainable Development Goals have become a far more central dynamic in the program. So the program was revised and reviewed. The learning outcomes were changed. There was a renewed focus on climate crisis and sustainable development. And of course, this also impacted in terms of what we did in relation to the recognition of prior learning, because we had to go back and redo the mapping exercise and see if the farmers were still reaching the goals and so on. So there was some changing there. And also in 2021, and this year, Glanbia, which is a name maybe not familiar to you, but it's it's the largest of the dairy producers in Ireland. And they decided they wanted to get their farmers to also join through what they call future farms. So you can see that the program has extended and expanded, and more farmers are becoming involved. And I suppose everybody is benefiting from this process, including the university. So within the Carberry group itself, you can see that there were a lot of important changes made. First of all, at the very top, I'd say our cleaner dairy farmers shifted their own thinking. And this is really, really important. And as part of the process, we visited some of the farms, and I was at the farm, and I grew up on a dairy farm myself. And I asked the farmer about the cows. And he explained to me about the cows, the breed of cows he was using, because when I grew up in a dairy farm, it was mostly Friesians and then Holsteins, but he was using a crossbreed between Jersey and Holstein. And I asked him why he was doing this. And he explained to me that these were smaller cows. They had less impact on the land. They produce more milk solids and less water in the milk. Therefore, it required less energy to chill the milk. It required less energy to transport the milk. And at the dairy, it required less energy to process the milk. So the cow was better for the land. The milk was of a better quality. And all of these combined had an important environmental impact. But you will see, and I would encourage you strongly to look at some of the other stories, to look at some of the other clever things that the farmers did to improve their environmental footprint. The digital stories, which I mentioned earlier, had a huge influence on their neighbours. So basically what we were trying to achieve, and we did achieve it, was if one dairy farmer sees that his or her neighbour has produced a story on changes in their farm, well, it gives them the encouragement that they could try similar changes on their farm. And that has been the case. It was promoted extensively on local media, and this raised more farmers' interest in becoming involved in pro-environmental projects. One thing we noticed is that there was a very strong pride in good practice. And you'll see this in the digital stories. The farmers are very conscious of what they are doing, and they are very conscious of their stewardship. of the land, the sense that they are custodians of the land for a period of time, but in also that they are custodians of the biodiversity, the ecology on their farms. The university validation has been really important because it has indicated to the farmers that what they're doing is important enough to be recognized as aligning with the sort of learning that undergraduate students in the university would do. This is really important for them because they now realize that this learning has a significant impact and it's important. More and more farmers wanted to taste the higher education experience, and this also encouraged more farmers to join into the Greener Dairies project. And we're hoping through this process that more dairies in Ireland will join our university or other universities for similar programs. This program has got a lot of national profile. It's been on the various media, and more farmers around the country are seeing this as a very important development. Now, to put in context, dairy farming has become very central to the Irish government planning, and dairy farming has been seen as being a problem because of high methane outputs and other environmental impacts. So the challenge for Ireland is quite significant. Dairy farming is a really, really important aspect of the Irish economy. And the challenges in terms of our greenhouse gases is quite significant, and dairy farming is at the center of that. So I suppose what we're trying to do here is we're trying to significantly change dairy practice. And we're also, I suppose, seeing and demonstrating that dairy farmers are prepared to engage in practices that can change this. Other dairy groups are influenced by what happened in Carbery. And this year, as I mentioned earlier, Glanbia has joined, and they are the biggest single dairy in the Irish system. Also, others want to follow, and the challenge for us is to be able to reach out to these and to engage in similar projects with them to allow their farmers to get their learning outcomes mapped, get the recognition of their prior learning, and allow them to advance onto our program. But we are also an adult education program, so we would see that some of these farmers will continue in their education process. They will do other courses. They may go on and complete full four-year degrees or master's programs. And what we want to do at a local level is we want to have an impact. We want to expand learning. And it's also important that research shows that when parents are involved in education, they are more likely to encourage their children to get involved in education. Adult learners influence their siblings, their children, their partners, their parents, their friends, and all kinds of people around them. So this is also a really important dimension of what we are doing here. It's not just the farmers, it's trying to change a wider culture. So these are the main points that I wanted to talk to you about this morning. But I suppose just in terms of the kinds of things we can learn from this. I may stop sharing the screen now, and then you can see me better. That first of all, that it's really important for universities and educational institutions to engage with the wider community, to be responsive to wider community needs, to be flexible in terms of their approach, and being responsive and flexible are critical dimensions to what we need to do in a fast changing world. In the 21st century, we are faced with huge challenges around climate, sustainable development, but a lot of other challenges, and we've seen these around health, and we see them in relation to food production in this case. And in each of these cases, it's really important for us to be responsive. And we think that our approach here everybody was able to benefit in a way that was useful to them. So the farmers were able to get a qualification, which is really useful for them in terms of, even in terms of applying for grant aid and loans from the banks and so on and so forth. Their education qualifications are useful to them. They also extended their learning. So they moved beyond the Carberry Greener Dairies project, and they engaged in new learning at the university. So they really deepened their knowledge of pro-environmental practice, why this is important. They developed new theories and so on. In that regard, they are influencers in their own communities in terms of environmental practice, in their communications with their neighbours and so on. So that's important. It was important for us in terms of our own recognition of prior learning policies. This was the first time that any Irish university had engaged in a cohort recognition of prior learning, where we looked at a group of people who had undertaken a similar area of study and practice. So this is completely new innovation in the Irish university system. It showed our university partners that in their departments and in their areas, they also can be creative in terms of the recognition of prior learning. We used a very rigorous system, so we didn't take any shortcuts. We made sure that the farmers' learning was properly validated, recognized, and so on. So there was no shortcuts here. So, and of course, the PhD student was able to do her research, and her work also contributes to our better understanding in terms of how we influence each other in terms of changing practice. And we can see this in all areas. We may, at a certain level, understand why it's important, but it may not change how we practice. And during the COVID-19 period, we saw very, very quickly why we had to change practices. And maybe we can bring this kind of learning in terms of challenges around climate and other global challenges as well. To me, they would be the key pieces of advice that I would like for you to bring from this small project. And if you need to know more, please email me and we can come back to you with more information on this. So on that note, I think I will wind up and thank you all for listening, and I hope it was interesting for you today. Thank you. Bye-bye.